Wakey wakey, you're the one, making tumors seem like fun. Jakey wakey, you're our friend. Let's hope you don't die. Hello everyone, my name's Stunsy Boy and welcome back to Reading with Stunsy. Today we are reading pages 141 to 159, about 18 pages, maybe less than that, I don't know, nor do I care. But yeah, besides that, without further ado, let's end the story of the real Jake. Margie and Gilligan were making chocolate chip cookies. It wasn't a good day for chocolate chip cookies because it was so hot they probably would fry the cookies in the street. But Jake hadn't asked for homemade chocolate chip cookies and Margie wasn't going to say no. So Margie and Gilligan were sweating together in their little kitchen. Margie had told Gilligan she didn't have to help, but Gilligan insisted. She said she might sweat off a pound or two, but Margie knew Gilligan would no offer moral support. It was a good thing she was there. For as long as Margie had worked for Evan, she knew the call was a possibility. Even so, she never expected it, and she was so caught up in Jake and she tended to forget about Evan's precarious world. So, when it came, she wasn't prepared, especially since it came from Michael. "Margie," Michael said when they answered the phone. His flat, gruff voice was unmistakable. "Hi, Michael. I have notified that Evan's dead." Margie's legs failed her. If Gilligan hadn't been in the kitchen with her, they would have whacked her head on the counter and she went down. Instead, she phoned to Gilligan, who was sturdy. It was a lot softer than the counter. Gilligan immediately wrapped her arms around Margie and propped her up. "Apparently an IED hit a vehicle he was in," Michael said. Margie gripped the phone and tried to breathe. She only met Michael at one time, and she knew the way he processed the world was very different from what was normal, but hearing the news this way was, "You there?" Michael said. She tried to speak, couldn't, and she cleared her throat. "Here. I've got Evan's will here. He named you Jake's guardian and left you the house and some savings. I'm an executor. I'll follow the proper procedures and file what must be filed. I'll bring you papers to sign when they're ready." Margie couldn't find the word in her brain that made sense. Gilligan took the phone from her hand. Margie's voice didn't work again for an hour. Gilligan filled in the gap. While Margie sat in the hard bladder back chair with an oak pedestal table near the kitchen, Gilligan coaxed more details out of Michael, checked on Jake, and Margie with a glass of water, finished the cookies, and brought a load of laundry up to the basement to fold. Gilligan didn't start to cry until she began folding Jake's t-shirts into neat little squares. Margie had been crying off and on the whole time. After the laundry was stacked, the women sat together, holding hands and staring at the table. Margie's mind was blank. Well, not completely blank. It was trying to figure out how to use her tongue to work in concert with the throat and her gums again. Eventually she found her voice. "I'm not crying about Evan," Margie said. Gilligan looked up and nodded. "I know." Margie wiped her eyes. "That sounds awful, though. I mean, I'm devastated that he's gone, of course," she sniffled. Gilligan pushed the box of tissues closer to Margie, who ignored it and wiped her nose in the back of her hand. "It's Jake I'm upset about." Margie dropped her face into her hands. "How am I going to tell him?" Her words muffled in her palms and her mushy in her thoughts. Gilligan put her hand on Margie's shoulders. Margie looked up. "His oncology team doesn't think he has much longer," she whispered, as if saying the words in a normal tone and hastened the truth into being. Gilligan pressed her lips together and her eyes filled. "I've known Jake since he was a tyke." Her voice was broken. She cleared her throat. "Even when Roxanne moved in here when Jake was 2. Even then, he was creative and kind," he smiled. "I love my kids, and but their oaths of comparison. It breaks my heart." She took her head and back the table. "But it doesn't go any good to try to figure out the limit of what is. All we can do is go forward from here." Margie nodded, wanted to do pretty much anything but to go forward from here. "I'm going to go fix some lemonade," Gilligan said. "We're going to drink it, and you'll figure out what's the best time to tell Jake." Margie nodded again. She felt like she was outside of herself. Watching her body do things like nod and sit and fold laundry, she felt separate from this ordinary herself. Getting the news about Evan and unearthed unethered her from the day-to-day concerns. "It's good Michael will handle Evan's estate," Gilligan cut into a lemon. The tart scent filled the room, and it lured Margie part way back into her body. "I never met Michael. He seemed little, well, cool on the phone. He numbers genius, manages money for wealthy people, and makes a killing doing it." He wiped her face. "He's not a bad guy. He just doesn't know how to connect. He doesn't feel the way we do. I might envy him," Gilligan said. "Me too." The shy robot knew he had to speak up about the glitch. If he didn't, the ship would crash. But he couldn't find his voice. All he could do is make little beeping sounds. Margie cleared her throat and then used a very sweet voice to say, "Bleep, bibbly, bleep, bleep, bloopity, blip, blip, bloop." But Jake tried to smile because he knew it was supposed to be funny, but smiling took more energy than he had. Jake was only half listening to Margie's story. In spite of her attempts at getting comfy again, he was still feeling not comfy, but listening was hard. And the story wasn't great either. Usually Margie told some awesome stories, exciting stories, filled with interesting characters, cool things, but tonight Margie's characters were boring. The shy robot was kind of stupid. But not that he'd tell her that, of course. But he couldn't tell her what he was tired, so he did. Margie frowned and leaned toward Jake. He tilted her head to study his face. Then she picked up his wrist and checked his pulse. Her skin was sweaty, and her hair clung to her neck and the sides of her cheeks, even though she was fanned to blow it around. Jake fought the fan as a knight, battling a dragon, spewing hot fire breath over everything in the room. Tonight, the knight was losing, big time. Margie let go of Jake's wrist and fussed over his IV line. A nurse had come that morning to put it in because he couldn't keep food down. The needle in the back of his hand pinched and stung. He hated it, but he didn't complain. He also didn't complain about the catheter. He hated it even more than the IV, but he was too weak to take care of things himself, and he was way too old to sweat the bed. What can I do for you? Margie asked. Nothing. I just want to go to sleep. Margie chewed on her lower lip for a second, then nodded and handed him Bodie. Even though Jake knew Bodie couldn't make him feel hotter, he gathered his plush bat close. It wasn't true that he wanted to go to sleep. That he wanted it was Simon. But he was really excited about talking to Simon tonight because he thought of some cool things he did today. He had been all so hot all day, it felt like the air wasn't even air anymore. It was like lava flowing around the room, choking whatever it touched. Jake was having trouble breathing. But even though he was lying in his bed too weak to do more than lift a thing, he decided he wanted to be on the beach. If he was on the beach in a heat like this, he could jump in the ocean and cool off. Maybe he could body surf or learn how to surf for real. He couldn't wait to tell Simon he did that. Margie bent over Jake and kissed his forehead. Her breath smelled funny. On the surface it smelled like lemonade, but under the good smell was something bad, something like vomit. Or maybe it was his own breath he was smelling. He'd thrown up the icky yellow stuff a couple times this afternoon. Jake closed his eyes, and as usual, Margie didn't leave the room. He stood by the bed and watched him. He kept his eyes closed and waited. Once he heard a faint shuffle, he opened his eyes slightly to see if Margie had moved. He hadn't. She just shifted position. What seemed as several minutes went by. He thought he heard a sob, and then he attempted to open his eyes and look at Margie, but he remained still. Jake? He opened his eyes. Margie would have ever spoken to him after he closed his eyes. What? I don't think Simon's going to visit tonight. Jake blinked at her. How do you know Simon visits at bedtime? Margie winked at him. I was sure the wink was supposed to be cheerful, but it looks wrong, kind of twisted and out of place. I'm that good, kiddo. Her voice didn't sound right either. Her usual lit in her voice was been flattened by something Jake couldn't understand. No, seriously, Jake wasn't in the mood to be teased, especially when the teasing hadn't been done right. Margie sat on the edge of the bed. I heard you talking to him through the door, she admitted. You were listening? It's my job to be sure you're okay. I want to hear something going on in your room. I have to check it out. Jake thought about that. It was fine, he decided. It's not like he was telling Simon secrets. He didn't mind Margie knowing all the stuff the real Jake had been doing. He frowned. But why isn't he coming tonight? Margie blinked several times and swallowed. Well, he just can't tonight. You know sometimes when you're not up to doing things you want to do? Jake nodded. It's like that. Jake rubbed his eyes so he can give away how upset he was. For some reason, he didn't want Margie to know he was disappointed. It's okay, he told Margie. He nodded. Are you sure you don't want me to finish the story? She shook his head and closed her eyes again. I'll just go to sleep. She leaned over and kissed him again. Her cheek touched his. Hers was wet. Margie made it to Jake's door before her legs gave out. He barely pulled the door shut behind her, and she slid down the wall of the floor, landing like a rag doll. Her legs splayed out on the hardwood. Her sweaty skin squeaked against the wood polish. The tears she tried to hold back in Jake's room, the ones that started to slip down her cheeks in spite of her determination when it would fall, now wanted to burst like a reservoir of water free to stand. But she didn't let them. If she cried, she wanted to cry. Jake would hear her. She was not going to let Jake hear her cry. She gave in to some silent sobs, her shoulders heaving. Then, grasping her hair in both hands, she just sat and rocked herself. Margie had no idea how long it took, but eventually she felt settled enough and strong enough to get off the floor. Pressing back against the wall, she levered herself in the standing position, pausing in an instant to listen to the baby monitor. She started down the hall toward the bathroom. Then she ended up stopping outside of Evan's door. She looked at the doorknob when she put her hand on it. She never went to Evan's room while he was gone. While he was home, she'd go in the room to vacuum or put laundry away or whatever. When he was done, though, coming in there felt like an invasion of privacy. Now he was gone, and the house was hers. She still couldn't believe that. Evan's room would be her room. She wanted her to take it from the beginning. It makes sense, he said. You'd be right here next to Jake, and the bed's bigger, and it's cooler in the summer. Yeah, and I feel like I was sleeping in your bed, she thought. No thanks, I need my own space, she told him. And he didn't even realize until Michael gave her the news that the real issue was she wanted Evan to be more than just a boss. But being in his room, she was gone mad. Made her feel like a lovelorn stalker. Love him like a brother, she snorted. Boy, has she been lying to herself. Margie opened the door and stepped into Evan's room. It was just as she remembered it, filled with cherry mission-style furniture and dark green light tan curtains and a comforter. The room felt discreetly masculine. Neat, but not too neat. The room revealed its occupant. The walls were covered in family photos. Jake's happy and the not as happy face dominated those. The shelves were stuffed into fiction ranging from backpack mysteries to hardcover classics, non-fiction in dozens of genres, and how-to books revealing the ins and outs of doing everything from rebuilding a car engine to planting the garden. Obviously, Jake had gotten his insatiable desire to knowledge from his dad. Crossing his queen-size bed, Margie inhaled the lightly musty scent of the room. He was going to need an air it out. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She immediately shot up. It was too soon. She couldn't be in there. Margie fled the room, shut the door, and strode into the bathroom. Inside, she shut the door, then blew her nose several times. She turned to the tap, ran cold water, and splashed her face. When she wiped her face, she braved a look in the mirror. Bad move. Her makeup was smeared. That meant it was on the towel. He looked down. Yep, brown black smudges stained the tan cherry cloth. Reaching into the medicine cabinet, Margie got a makeup remover and wiped her face clean. When she gathered up the towel, she might as well do a load. She was going to sleep anytime soon. Margie sat up in bed. What was that? In a testament to how little she knew herself, Margie had fallen asleep in the basement lawn chair while the towels were washing. So, once she put on the towels in the dryer, she went up to bed, wearing just an exercise bra and shorts. She lay on top of the covers over her bed. Her fan was aimed directly at her, but it was all warm air and could tackle tiny hairs in her arms. Margie closed her eyes and surrendered to oppressive open was her room. She fallen asleep almost instantly, but now she was awake again. She heard something. Yes, voices. She could hear voices. Light from the outdoor lamp, the three-quarter moon spilled into the room through the open window above her bed. It was enough to illuminate the surface of her nightstand. What was that, the baby monitor? Amy took a breath. She left it in the basement. Leaping out of the bed, Margie left her room and padded down the steps of the first floor. Once there, she stopped. She could still hear the voices, but they were barely more than murmurs. She couldn't make out words. She couldn't identify the voices either. Were they male, female? Was it Jake? If so, who was talking to him? Instead of going down the basement like the baby monitor, Margie went towards Jake's room. The hallway was dark, but she could feel her way. Running her hand along the top of the dark Wisconsin trim of the hall, she listened and approached Jake's room. She thought the voices were getting louder, but she reached Jake's door. The voices were silent. Margie stood perfectly still, listening. Inside Jake's room, his fan humming and engulfing shifts from low pitch to high pitch. In the kitchen, the fridge added to the voices, throbbing more chorus. Then, even far away, Margie's fan contributed a deeper drone. Outside, the dark bark inside the house made a creaking sound, like it was popping its knuckles, as if houses had knuckles to pop. It had taken Margie a long time to get used to the bungalow's constant rasping groans. On darker winter nights, she sometimes wondered if the house was alive. It sounded like it was uncomfortable and it was trying to constantly shove it into a better position. In the summer, it seemed more constant, but occasionally made a more inexpressible sound that froze Margie in her tracks. But sounds are sounds, voices are voices, and Margie had no longer hearing voices. She put her hand on Jake's door, attempting to open it and go in. She knew, though, that the right night checks often disturbed him. If she was sleeping, she didn't want to wake him, so Margie got the baby monitor and went back to bed. When Margie checked on Jake early in the morning, she knew it would no longer put off what she had been avoiding. "Hi, Margie," Jake whispered when he saw her. His eyes were barely open. His skin was almost translucent gray, and she stretched to the top of his face, and Margie could see the perfect contours of the facial bones in his skull. He looked more like a corpse than Margie wanted to admit. "Hey, kiddo," she checked on him over. And bustling around the kid like a normal day, and she was going to do normal things. "So you'll never guess the forecast," Margie said. Hot." "Oh, you guess. You're so smart." Jake did his best to smile. He watched him touch his tongue to a couple of small cracks on his lips. It honestly hurt him to move his mouth. Margie picked up a tube of lip moisturizer from his nightstand and gently applied it on Jake's lips. "What shall we do first today? Fly to the moon or build a spaceship?" "You're silly," Jake said. "I've been called worse," Margie snapped her fingers. "I know. We'll build a robot first. Then he can build the spaceship and fly us to the moon." Margie stopped moving. He looked at him, frowned, and then sat in the bed. "What, Jake?" "I don't want to pretend today." Margie took a deep breath. She picked up Jake's bony, limp hand. "Okay, I won't make you. I don't want you to get mad." "Okay, that would be bad," Margie said. "Very, very bad," they said together. Then Jake drifted back to sleep. Wearing an old gray blouse she hadn't put on in years, Margie sat on the dining room table and methodically up and down every one of smiley face t-shirts. Chirr, snip, chirr, snip. The sound of the scissors sliding through the fabric of the snapping clothes was surprisingly satisfying. Margie lost herself in her task. She sewed steadily. Even when Margie's hand muscles started aching, she kept cutting, and she slashed her last happy yellow constants. She dropped the remains of the pile, carefully placed scissors next to it. That's when Gilligan showed up at the door, and as if she knew Margie was going to need support with what she had to do. Stepping into the living room, Margie mentioned for Gilligan to come in. As soon as she did, Margie's tears returned, and Gilligan strode to her. She took Margie's hand and squeezed it. Her chin moved against the top of Margie's head as she chewed gum. Margie was still wintergreen. "You didn't do whatever you have to do," Gilligan said. "Would she?" Margie wasn't so sure. "The kids have gone on the day trip with friends," Gilligan said. "Dave's at work. I'm here. What do you need to do?" "It's time to call a hospital and arrange for Jake to be taken to the hospice center." Gilligan's eyes moistened, but she brushed her hands together and said, "Then let's go sit down and do that." Gilligan thought the process was going to be complicated, but Dr. Benjamin paved the way to Jake's transfer. All the paperwork was done. All they needed was to send an ambulance and a couple EMTs and a hospice nurse. "We can have an ambulance there by noon," the administrator told Margie. "Thank you," she said, not feeling thankful at all. She felt resentful, angry, and rage. How could all the love and caring and positive expectations she brought Jake here? Margie would have been sure she could get him through this. Outside, an ice cream truck went by. The tinkling music sounded strangely ominous. The ambulance arrived at 11:32, and Margie's stomach rolled as she saw it pull up. She couldn't remember the last time she dreaded something as much as she dreaded this. Margie was checking the baby monitor regularly since she made the call. She hadn't heard anything. She looked at him once to find Jake curled on his side, and Bodie was on his shoulders, making steadily up and down his irregular breathing. She thought it had been going in to tell him it was going to happen, but she didn't bring herself to do it. There was so much she needed to tell Jake first. Of course, she needed to tell him that her father had died. Second, given that his father was dead, she thought he would reveal to Jake the identity of his nightly visitor. Wouldn't it be more comforting to know that it was his dad loved him as much as orchestrated house those visits can to believe the nameless, faceless friend who lived in the cabinet? Third, she had to tell him where he was going. She planned on doing all this before the ambulance arrived, but now it was too late. Okay, she'd get them settled at the hospital before she told him everything else. Margie was pacing in the living room when the ambulance turned into the driveway. Gilligan sat in an easy chair near the front door, her hands forced into her lap, her eyes closed. For the first 10 minutes after Margie made her call, Gilligan started a conversation. She attempted to get Margie to talk about how she felt, but Margie wasn't ready to do that, and Gilligan correctly interpreted the monosyllabic answers as plea for silence. Still, she said Margie was grateful for that. She didn't want to talk, but that didn't mean she was strong enough to know what she was doing by herself. I'll get the door, Gilligan said as two young blonde EMTs and one dark-haired, middle-aged hospice nurse got out of the ambulance. The EMTs lifted the stretcher from the back of the ambulance while the hospice nurse approached the front door. She carried the clipboard in a medicine bag. Gilligan opened the door to the nurse. I'm Gilligan, friend and neighbor. This is Margie. She's Jake's guardian. The short woman was kind, round-faced, and held her hand. Margie managed to shake it, but it was like anything. What was she supposed to say? Thank you for coming? I'm Nancy, the woman said. She smiled at both Gilligan and Margie. She was clearly an experienced hospice nurse. Her smile was just big enough to be really friendly and reserved enough to difference to the situation. I have a couple of things for you to sign, Nancy said to Margie. The EMTs threw open a screen door and rolled the stretcher through. Its wheels clattered across the threshold, and Margie felt like a house was being invaded by armed intruders. She wanted to fight them off and force them to go away, which was ridiculous, but she called them. Just a sec, boys, Nancy held out her clipboard to Margie. Sign here and here, for admission to acknowledge that you will be providing privileged care only. Then we can get Drake transferred and settled in. Margie signed the papers, keeping in mind the blank possible. But it was blank enough. She felt like she was signing a piece of paper, confessing her complete and total failure as a caregiver, maybe even as a human being. All right then, Nancy put the form back on the clipboard. That was easy enough. Let's go see Jake, shall we? Margie's muscles tightened. Gilligan obviously sensed it, because she reached down and took Margie's hand, helping her out of the chair. You're doing the right thing, she whispered to Margie's ear when Margie stood. This way, Gilligan told the EMTs. She led Margie through the living room and down the hall, stopping in front of Jake's door. She glanced at Margie and waited. Margie opened Jake's door. Second, Margie stepped into the room. She knew. She felt it. The room was too still, too empty. Even though Jake's poor, depleted body lay in the bed, Jake was gone. Because Margie turned into a statue in the doorway, Gilligan was practically lifting Margie to move to her side to all the EMTs, and Nancy entered the room. Gilligan didn't say anything. Margie was pretty sure Gilligan knew Jake was gone too. Nancy must have sensed it as well, because she frowned, and then strode to the bed and felt Jake's pulse. She looked up at the EMTs and gave him a slight head shake. They stopped wheeling the stretcher, and they both stared at the floor. Nancy looked at Margie. I'm so sorry. He's passed on. Margie nodded. For once, her eyes were dry. What she was feeling was too much ordinary tears. What she was feeling called for a steaming fit and a total mental breakdown. Since now it wasn't the time for either of those, she had no response to offer. She was human void. She wanted to fold herself and to fall into the void. She wanted to let it suck from her form, from this reality. But she knew she couldn't escape it so easily. So Margie forced her legs to work, and she crossed Jake's bed. His body looked so fragile, small and fragile. She leaned over him and pressed her lips to his forehead. I love you, Jake. I love you so much. Body tickled her chin. Gilligan came up to Margie and whispered, Goodbye, Jake. The three medical professionals wouldn't have to take reason to say anything amiss. For all they knew, this was normal. Even Gilligan knew had commented on it. She might have seen it, but she wouldn't attach any meaning to it. Margie would have. She didn't see anybody saw. 5 people, 5 sets of eyes, and none of them noticed the little cabinet door was wide open. And that is the end of that. My only question, though, about that story, what did that have to do with Five Nights at Freddy's? That was just... That was just sad. Like, even for me, that was just sad. Like, yeah, the other one where, the girl gets taken over, everyone around her has cancer, that's sad, but that's a more methodical sad, because it's like, it's as sad as it is interesting to watch, but that was just sad. Anyways, hope you guys this is a fantastic, wonderful day. People like being fishy, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Next time we're reading pages 162 to 180, and we're reading the new book titled, or new short story titled Hide and Seek. I don't know what that's about because I forgot. But yeah, hope you guys this is a fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.